All right, folks, I want to welcome back Chad and Bob to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks, man. Good to be here again.
Thanks for having us back.
I know this is becoming like a habit, isn't it?
Feels that way, yeah.
But that's a good thing.
It's like smoking. It's hurting my lungs.
Well, we do apologize for that, but we can't help it.
It's strange my lungs are healing.
From the vid.
Well, that's a good.
I think we're coming on to the show.
Well, I'm glad you guys are here. I know we're going to talk about giants tonight, and I know you guys recently did a show on the Paracas skull, so I'm really curious to get into some of that and some of your thoughts, but let's get into this giant thing. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've always been fascinated with giants, and obviously getting into the Bigfoot thing, I sort of talk about giants in my head a lot in relation to Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, Yeren, whatever you're talking about, right? But I'm not so sure after some of the things that I've looked into that they're actually connected. But there is a ton of stuff out there biblically and in other places about giants. So, Chad, is that something that you've been interested in before we started talking about doing a show about it?
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in, I first started getting into this stuff related to Sasquatch and Bigfoot, and just kind of going down the rabbit hole ended up coming across stuff that does cross his paths with giants and where the Sasquatch might come through. I know a lot of experiencers, when they're asked, what do you think they are? A lot of them actually quote the Nephilim. And then the Nephilim, yes, biblical, but potentially what we're talking about here related to giants. And there's a lot of cross. You mentioned the Paracas skulls. We did a show on the Paracas skulls with Brian Forrester, who's kind of like the main guy on researching those. We did that back in September of 2021. And that was at the recommendation of what's our best man, the Sierra Sounds.
Yeah, our Sasquatch recorder of the first Sasquatch sounds.
Ron Moorhead, we had on the show. Yeah.
The man, the myth, the legend.
And he recommended we get Brian Forrester on about the Paracas skulls. So we did that. And then, over the last year, there's been a lot of cross in research between the Paracas skulls, the giants, the Nephilim, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, etc. And that's kind of piqued my interest. What about you, Bob? You've got somebody that who's big time into the giants.
That's true, yeah. So do you guys remember what killed Encyclopedia Britannica?
No.
When computers first came out. Remember Encarta? Encyclopedia Encarta?
Well, that's going back.
So we had Encyclopedia Britannica in my house, and then we got a computer then that was dead to us as children. I was a child at the time.
How old are you now? Like 72?
Yes. So Encyclopedia Encarta had, I was going from A to Z because I was like, what, this is crazy, like learning the computer, whatever. And in G, they had giants. So I've been interested in that idea that there were giants and we don't know much about them since I was a child. But a colleague of my father's grew up in Ohio, and he's big on these mounds that they have not been dug into, but he believes that giant graves of giants may be in Ohio, like a shit ton of them.
And how come nobody's dug into those?
I don't know. If I was an archaeologist, I would do it myself. I'm sure it's protected land, because Ohio is a very flat state.
Yeah,
very,
exactly.
very flat. So I'm not sure why.
And they're not just Indian or Native American mounds?
I'm sure they're protected land. So
yeah,
if not, I would dig into them.
They're probably not digging into them now because diesel is like $14 a gallon.
That doesn't help. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But, digging into the giant issue, there's the Lovelock Cave thing in Nevada. You're familiar with that, I would assume, Brian?
Yeah, I did some research on that. I'm not as familiar as I would like to be, but I was sort of fascinated by that. That's the one where the Native Americans ran these sort of red-headed giants basically into this cave and set fire to the entrance of the cave and basically burned them up. Am I on the right track?
Yeah. So let me just read this. According to ancient legend, North America was once inhabited by a race of giants that were much taller and stronger than the average man. These giants, a red-haired tribe of cannibals known as the Siteka, often harassed the Paiute tribe with war and captured their victims to eat. So obviously, this is just an ancient legend. But the thing is, there is a cave that apparently people found lots of tools and things um, that were just huge, right? Now, I don't know what to believe because I haven't seen it myself, but like you said, or like I said, what do you believe? Do you believe that these things were actually found and then covered up, or it's just a story?
By the Smithsonian Museum
I
specifically,
mean, that's
or
one of the conspiracy theories is that the
Right.
Smithsonian Museum was they actually found out about remnants of giants, and specifically these very large rock. What do you call those things you break rocks with?
rock breakers.
Yes.
I don't know.
And they covered it up. I don't know what to believe in that, but so going down that rabbit hole, there's all this stuff about the square cube law and why giants can't exist. Have you heard of the square cube law, Brian?
No, I haven't.
So the square cube law states that as an object grows or shrinks in size, its volume grows and shrinks faster than its surface area. So something that is 4 times as large as a normal animal will actually weigh 8 times as large. So what does that mean? That means that its musculature wouldn't be able to support its weight. So the common wisdom, I use that word a lot, but the common wisdom among, all of the scientists out there who consider this and basically debunk it right off the bat is that a human could not be as large as what we're talking about, a giant, because their musculature would not be able to support their weight. But then you have to ask, well, then how do you explain the dinosaurs that were supposedly super huge?
And
Right.
not skeletal system, musculature. What are you saying?
The musculature.
Okay.
That's you don't know what that means?
Skeletor.
And you had that goddamn
I would think this
encyclopedia, whatever.
It was Encyclopedia Encarta, and it wasn't the best, but it did kill Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah. So a lot of people will cite the case of Robert Wadlow. He's the tallest man that we know of in modern times, quote unquote modern. He was 8'11". He grew so tall that he required leg braces and a cane to aid his walking. And he died at an early age, because of all the issues. But the thing is, he wasn't a giant. He had an issue, right? You call that
medical issue. Yeah. He was in Guinness Book of World Records.
Yeah. So he had what's called gigantism, which is where your hormones just continue.
Did you guys freeze up?
The growth. They don't know. You and I, when we reach a certain height, weight.
Hey, Chad.
We can hear you fine.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, hold on. I lost you for like 15 or 20 seconds. So let me go back on the audio here I recorded and see where you were when we started
What's called gigantism.
pixelating. You basically got to the point where when you froze up for me, he had a medical condition of gigantism.
Oh, wow. Now I'm hearing myself.
Yeah,
okay,
you just.
So are you hearing us okay now?
Yep. Go ahead.
All right. So yeah, Robert Wadlow, 8'11". He had gigantism. He wasn't a giant as we'd think of it. He was a human who basically had a hormonal imbalance, and he kept growing and growing and growing. He died at an early age.
Asian gentleman.
No, he's an American guy.
Oh, I think okay. So the current guy is Asian in the Guinness Book, which is my Bible.
So, but the thing is, people cite that as evidence that giants couldn't exist because if they grew to a certain height and a certain size, that, like I said, the musculature wouldn't be able to basically support it. But the thing is, he was out of balance.
Yeah, he's a normal human with the disease.
So giants back in the day, if they had a much stronger bone density, if they had a lot more muscles, maybe they would have been able to support it. And the other thing is, how did dinosaurs exist? Right? If you think about like the common brontosaurus we all know of with the huge neck, if you think of Jurassic Park, and it weighed, many, many, many tons, how could that thing have possibly existed if gravity won't allow you to support such a huge structure? There's a way of thinking that says, millions of years ago, the atmosphere was much more dense than it is now, and therefore it could support heavier weights. I don't know. I'm not obviously not a paleontologist or anything like that, so I don't know. But it does seem like we shouldn't just dismiss the idea out of hand, especially when we have so many experiencers who are talking about Bigfoots, right? Sasquatches that are 10 feet tall, 12 feet tall, and just 4 feet.
Giraffe, their huge necks.
Yeah.
Their ancestors, which are called Semotheriums, 7 million years ago had half the size of that neck. So I think there is some, analysis could be done that says there could be a freaking giant, just huge, everything.
Yeah, but with the giraffe, they're also very skinny, to use that word.
But their neck doubled in size.
Yeah. So the issue that with giraffes have, that I read somewhere, is
he has a pet giraffe, folks.
the pumping of blood up to the brain.
Okay.
It has to travel a long way.
But it does it.
It does, but the lifespan apparently is not very long.
So there could so apply that to a giant. No one said giants are averaging 75 years old.
Well, that's true. And also, the concept of a giant is something ancient, and we don't know what their, entire makeup was. Maybe they had huge hearts. Maybe they had very large arteries. We just don't know that. All we have are potential artifacts of very large bones, supposedly that have been found. All of the scientists and common wisdom out there would say that all that stuff was faked. But same thing with aliens and UFOs and Bigfoots. They'll all say that was all faked. So, you do the Bigfoot stuff very often, obviously, Brian. And so the concept of the Gigantopithecus is something you're very familiar with, yes?
Yeah. And before you go into that, I just want to sort of piggyback on what you were saying. That's the one thing that is sort of stuck in my craw when it comes to the possibility of giants, because I'm sort of a scientific minded skeptic about most all of these things, right? And when you start talking about giants, and even when people tell me about Sasquatch sightings when they're 10 feet, 12 feet, I've even had people tell me as large as 13 feet. I don't think that really registers to most people how huge that is when you're talking about a bipedal upright walking creature, and the things that have to go into that as far as mechanics of movement and the musculature and just the supportive mechanisms in the body to support that kind of weight, like you were talking about, Chad. So I start thinking that's a little bit farther out there than I'm sometimes willing to travel. 8 feet is huge, right? When you're talking about like a upright bipedal ape-like creature, whether it be a person or not. But again, when you're 10 feet, 12 feet, 13 feet, just the amount of structure that it would take to carry that around, it sometimes puts it outside the realm of possibility for me. So when you're talking about something outside of a Sasquatch-like creature, and we're talking about a human, a hominin, I don't know, it just really is a stretch for me. So I'm kind of on the fence when it comes to that. I know, when I was doing research for this show, I started listening to some of the other shows out there, and I can't remember what podcast. I think it was maybe Blurry Creatures that did a show on giants, and they had this guy on there who was doing these historical deep dives into articles and things about giants. This guy found like 700 and something articles over the last 100 years about giants being found. So, my scientific brain tells me one thing, but I'm all about the anecdotal evidence. And I believe that when people start saying that they're seeing these kind of things and they're finding this kind of evidence, my ears perk up a little bit, but I'm always a little bit skeptical, even about the Gigantopithecus thing, because science has a way of inventing what it wants people to know or what it wants people to believe. And the thing about Gigantopithecus blacki is we've only found, or scientists have only found, basically, I think, a partial jawbone and a few teeth. And then they've created this being that was supposed to be, they've done the extrapolations or whatever and turned this thing into this, 8, 9, 10 foot giant. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence, but you're pulling up a picture, so I'm going to shut up and let you talk.
Yeah, no. So let me, go off of what you just said and talk about some of what was found. So the Gigantopithecus blacki is the largest hominoid that has ever lived, the closest thing to giants that we've officially, quote unquote, discovered. So a 2019 study of protein found that orangutans are the closest living relative of the Gigantopithecus. And the image that I've popped up, which I'll send to you for your show notes, shows how large the Gigantopithecus would have been in comparison to a human. And that is enormous, right?
Yeah, at least double in size. Yeah.
I mean, that would be a giant, undoubtedly.
Mhm.
So the fragmentary fossils were primarily found in China, and they're thought to be somewhere between 300,000 and 2 million years old. They found more than 1,000 teeth. From those teeth, researchers have theorized, that the animal was more than 9 feet tall when standing on 2 legs, but that it probably spent most of its time on all fours. That would make sense when it comes to supporting that entire huge musculature that you might need for appenditures or whatever you call it to move around. So previous research determined that the Gigantopithecus was likely quadrupedal, as I said, because its jaws and teeth, while much larger, were similar to those of modern orangutans. So the question is, what if giants, as we're talking about giants being more human than orangutan, had bones that were much more dense, just like what would have been required for the Gigantopithecus? The thing is that they weren't able to take DNA of the Gigantopithecus because in that climate where they found the teeth in China, it wouldn't have lasted that long. But they have a new way of basically taking the proteins and comparing them. And those proteins are what told them that this was a relative of the modern orangutan. So if you take an orangutan's teeth and compare it to the teeth of this Gigantopithecus, that's how you are able to extrapolate how much larger this thing must have been, unless you think that for some reason, this being that was, let's say, 1 million years old, for whatever reason, just had freakishly giant teeth in its head. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that's impossible, but, I can't rule it out either. And then the thing is, I mentioned the theory of the atmosphere being possibly thicker in the time of dinosaurs, which is why things like Brontosaurus was able to actually survive and not just fall over under its own weight. There's the flying pterosaur paradox. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Brian. Have you heard of that?
I have.
So yeah, the pterosaur is the largest flying animal ever known to exist in the time of the dinosaurs. It's so huge that there's no chance it would have been able to fly in our current conditions, but we know it existed because we have the fossils to show it. We have them in the museums hanging up over our heads. So how was that possible? So if we go back to that square cube law, that thing should not have existed, but it did. So how do we square those two things? And I don't have the answer to that. But to me, the Gigantopithecus issue says that these things are possible.
So could it be possible? How is gigantism is like, I'm assuming past maybe through DNA or whatever? How's that? Could there be a whole group of beings, Homo sapiens, that had giganticism or whatever?
I mean, I guess it's possible, but the thing is, it's such a defect that you don't live long with it.
Right.
And
So yeah, maybe they didn't live long.
it's not. It's hard to imagine that there was a whole race of people that had. I mean, this is a
Gigantism.
DNA level malfunction. It's hard to believe that there would be an entire race of people with that same malfunction that procreated and had offspring, and they all had that same, I don't know. It's possible, I guess, but it just seems unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
And I came across this. Have you heard of the giant footprint in a granite outcrop in Mpumalanga, South Africa? I hope I said that right.
Well, I'm glad you're the one that said it. I have heard of it. I have not seen any photos of it, but I did in the research. I heard it somebody mentioned it on one of the shows that I was listening to.
Okay, let me pop this up. So this is the image of it. Now, that looks like a footprint, yes?
Definitely looks like a left foot.
Yeah, exactly.
Huge.
So the granite that's sticking up is vertical, and the footprint is in the vertical. And so the thought is that at some point there was basically soft volcanic material, if you will, and this thing stepped in it. And this thing eventually protruded out of the earth, because that's why it's a protrusion of granite, and it's sustained after all this time. But, scientists, again, debunkers, will just immediately say this is just a natural occurrence that happens to be the shape of a footprint. Now,
with toes.
With toes.
I mean,
and if you look at it, you can see the big toe, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the pinky toe tends to curl in, right?
yeah, it looks like.
I mean, it's almost exactly like a footprint. But the thing is that you can't tell the scale from this. Let me pop this other image for you so you can understand the scale of this, because look at this man standing next to it. So that footprint is 4 feet tall.
Wow.
This is not a giant of 8 feet or 9 feet or 10 feet. If you were to extrapolate the size of that footprint, this would be somebody who's 24 to 27 feet tall. Now that's hard to fathom.
Damn.
Right?
Yeah.
So, Brian, would you tend to say that this is a natural occurrence just over time that happens to look like a footprint?
It's kind of hard to say. I mean, obviously somebody may have carved that over time and it just aged, whatever. I've heard somebody talk about this in the past, and the scientist or whoever that I heard talking about it said that you physically can't make an impression in this type of granite or whatever the case may be. I don't know. I'm clearly not a scientist, but it certainly looks like a footprint, right? And that sort of leads me to some of the stories that I've heard about modern day sightings of 20-foot plus giants that are supposedly roaming the earth as we speak. And again, I have to shake my head. That really doesn't compute for me. Like back to Gigantopithecus, right? I can certainly get the science behind, and I can get behind the fact that there was once a hominoid that existed that could have been that size, right? But we're talking about a large, hairy, primarily quadrupedal hominoid that could have existed, 200,000 to 2 million years ago. It just doesn't equate to me. It doesn't, I don't know how to even word it. It doesn't really equate to me that there were modern day humanoid giants, right? Because obviously, if you saw a Gigantopithecus blackie today in the woods here in North Carolina, it would look nothing like a modern day man. But what people are describing with some of these accounts of these giants that we're talking about, they're very human like. So I don't know. I kind of shake my head and I scratch my head because that doesn't equate. The two don't, they don't run parallel for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I find it hard to believe that there's giants roaming right now, except for maybe, 8 to 10 feet tall possible Sasquatches based on all the accounts we hear, unless all these people are nuts, which I find that hard to believe as well.
And they may move between dimensions. Like they're not.
Yeah, that's one of the
hiding.
theories, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you brought up the fact of all of these articles that came out back in the day of giants being discovered, the bones being discovered. Here's an example I just popped up from the New York Times. This says published May 4. I believe that's 1908. It's so old that part of that is not legible, but I believe that's 1908. Mm-hmm. And it says Boston, May 3rd, Charles C. Clapp, who was recently returned from Mexico, where he's been in charge of Thomas W. Lawson's mining interests, has called attention of a professor to a remarkable discovery. He found in Mexico a cave containing 200 skeletons of men, each above 8 feet in height. The cave was evidently the burial place of a race of giants who antedated the Aztecs, in other words, older than the Aztecs. He arranged the bones of one of these skeletons and found the total length to be 8 feet, 11 inches. The femur reached up to his thigh, and the molars were big enough to crack a coconut. The head measured 18 inches from front to back. So, I mean, who knows? I mean, it is the New York Times, but it is also 1908. Why would somebody fake this? I doubt he made money off this, right?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why somebody would fake an article like that. And I kind of chalk a lot of that stuff up, or at least in my brain, I sometimes rationalize it as misidentification. Skeletons tend to spread out over time. And if you find a bunch of bones and you try to put it together and come up, it's very difficult, or more difficult than most people would believe, forensically to do that, like grave sites of murder victims and things like that, right? They're trying to come up with a height and weight approximation of a victim of a murder, for example. It's very difficult to do. There's a lot of scientific calculations that go behind that. It's not just laying the bones out and saying, oh, well, if I measure it from the top of the head to the bottom of this foot bone, it's now 9 feet tall. Well, that may not be entirely accurate. So, yeah. But that said, it's a compelling report, and it did make it into the New York Times. So
if I were to find a skeleton and did that, is that more accurate than finding a tooth and then extrapolating it to a whole body? You know what I mean? With the technology we have today. I know that a lot of the times they date stuff by taking a small sample, and it always seems to be inaccurate to me. If they say, oh, we found this skeleton of a dinosaur, and we say it could be a range of, this many thousand years to this 100,000 years, there always seems to be, it doesn't seem exact.
Yeah, I think there isn't an inexact science to dating, the carbon dating, for sure.
So how is this extrapolation from a tooth?
Well, but that's just taking what we know of modern animals and the size of their teeth to do what they do and extrapolating it, but it's not dating it. I don't know. I don't know the accuracy.
No, yeah, it's definitely not dating it. My point is our technological advances in predicting what was in the past aren't always 100% accurate. Yeah. So maybe a skeleton in the ground, even if this person says he put it down and it was almost 9 feet tall.
So in the case of the teeth, if you do they did the protein analysis, right, and said that it's closest to an orangutan. So if it was like an orangutan, it was a descendant or a sedent to an orangutan, and we know how many teeth that animal has in it, and you took that size of that tooth, and put the same number of teeth in another animal's head, you can kind of assume how large that head would have to be to fit all those teeth. Is it possible that this was an animal with fewer teeth that were just larger? I guess.
Or hydrocephalus, where their head's all huge.
I guess.
Water in the brain.
Does that also increase the size of your teeth?
I don't think so, actually.
Yeah, right. So
The more
anyway,
you talk, the more it didn't make sense when you were talking, right, Bob?
Right. Yes.
I get
Just
what you're
trying-
saying. It's like with the Shroud of Turin, right? I think they did some carbon dating and things like that, and it turned, there were so many different people that came back and said so many different things. It could have been 42 minutes old. It could have been 4 million years old. But I think what Chad is saying, as far as the extrapolation with the size of the teeth for Gigantopithecus, for example, I get the science behind that. What I'm saying is some Yahoo that's out in a cave in New Mexico and he finds a skeleton and he lays the bones out and he comes back and reports that it was almost 9 feet tall. I'm probably not going to buy that as much as somebody that's scientifically trained to do that sort of extrapolation is all I'm saying.
So the problem we have is that, traditional scientists, professionals, PhDs, et cetera, they're not willing to touch any of this stuff because they're going to be ridiculed. So think about the UFO issue, right? Nobody in their right mind who is at a university, a PhD, leading the astronomy, whatever, is going to step out and say, I believe that this is aliens. Avi Loeb did that, right? We know that. We've had him on our show twice. And he said that Oumuamua was interstellar, meaning it came from an outside solar system because of the path it took. And even though he is the leading astronomer at Harvard, he was ridiculed for it. And he produced all the evidence, all the calculations. I mean, he's a very, very smart man. And he still has to fight an uphill battle to say, look at the size and shape. Where in nature does something a millimeter thin and a football field long and wide travel interstellar into our solar system and then back out again? And still everybody comes up with all these reasons why that's not real, that's not true, even though all of their debunking mathematically he can prove to be false. So until somebody with credentials who's much smarter than us, is willing to take these things on, it's all going to be conjecture, but we can still talk about it. Yes or no?
Or if they find a skeleton of a giant.
Yeah, but they're still going to debunk it.
Well, they can debunk it, but if
so
archaeologist
the conspiracy theory is that those skeletons were found, the Smithsonian came, took them up, destroyed them, and they disappeared. Now the Smithsonian, of course, comes out and says that's a bunch of hooey. And so who do I believe? The established Smithsonian people, I would tend to believe them, or the people on the quote unquote fringe who say it's all a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, I popped up another article here just as an example. This one is from the San Antonio Express. Beach Giant's Skull Unearthed by WPA workers near Victoria. The print is too small to read, but if you look at the image here, they've taken the skull that they found and compared it to average human skulls, and it's, quite a bit larger. That could be an 8 or 9 foot tall person probably. But there's, as you said, Brian, there's tons of articles like this. But, there's also tons of articles about flying discs from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. How many of them are just what's in our culture?
And this is from 1943, San Antonio Express. Is that what it says?
Does it? It's so hard to read because it's so old.
1945.
1945.
And a sofa cost $128.85 at that time.
That is nice. It's a nice looking sofa too, $128. Very nice. That's like $1 million in today.
Yeah. That's handmade too.
Oh, so that's what they found in the cave were giant sledgehammers. I have it in my notes here. I forgot the name somehow. In a copper mine in Wales that allegedly weighed 60 pounds each, which a sledgehammer you would use now, like by any average man, is about 20 pounds and much smaller. So who the hell was wielding these 60-pound sledgehammers in a mine?
Paul Bunyan.
And they say those sledgehammers date back 3,500 years. So, yet
Yeah,
another.
that was one of the things that I heard on one of the shows that I was listening to today when I was cramming for the rest of the notes for the show. Is there was some guy on one of the shows who was talking about some of the tools and some of the things that have been found over the history, and he kept talking about these large spears, and I don't remember exactly where they were found, but he was talking about these spears being almost 8 pounds and what size of a person it would take to throw a spear 30 or 40 yards in battle. And he was doing all this calculations. And I'm like, I get that's heavy, right? 8 pounds for a spear, pretty heavy. And in the old days, we don't really wield spears anymore in current times, but they were meant to throw long distances during battle. You could use them in close quarters battle, of course, if you had to, but they were meant to take out men from a distance. And 7 or 8 pounds is a lot when you're talking about throwing something, 30, 40 yards. It would take a huge person. But when you start getting into those kind of things, it's kind of subjective because, was it just a decorative spear? Was it really meant to be in battle? And all those things start happening. Like you're talking about the sledgehammers, for example. I have no explanation for that, and I'm not saying that I don't believe that that's not possible. It's just not probable. So I really have a hard time wrapping my brain around it, says the man who believes in Sasquatch. But
Exactly. And like I said before, I am not advocating that this is absolute truth. I just want to present all of the information. Um, can I move into the Paracas skulls because I'm gonna kind of weave all this together at some point.
absolutely.
Okay. So let me pull this image up. So as mentioned, we had Brian Forster on the show September of 2021, and he lives in Paracas, Peru, which is where the Paracas skulls are located in a museum there. And he's been really, really into this issue. So this is one of the Paracas skulls, and that's the actual hair. So the hair was preserved because it's a very dry climate. So as you can see, the head is extremely elongated towards the back. The hair is reddish and wavy. Now, back when this occurred, which was, if I remember correctly, somewhere between 1 and 3,000 years ago, the natives there had very fine, straight black hair. So this style, this color of hair is very out of the ordinary. So how did that occur? The other thing about it is, and let me pop another image here. This is another image of a Paracas skull that's in the museum. Um, Again, very elongated skull. And we do know that native peoples, even today, there are tribes or what have you in certain areas of the world, in Africa primarily, I believe, who do head binding. For some reason, they think it's a sign of nobility to bind the head and elongate the skull. So we know that that exists. But what's strange about these Paracas skulls, and Brian Forster kind of ran us through it, is that they're missing what's called the sagittal suture, which is the seam that goes along the middle of the skull that basically binds together the two plates. And that can occur naturally when there's a premature binding, because over time, as you age, it will bind, but you can still see the seam.
Mhm.
Even though it's bound together, you can still see it. In the case of the Paracas skulls, you cannot see it. There is no sagittal suture whatsoever. So this is what led him to believe that this was different. Also, Brian said that they found mummified babies who already had elongated skulls and again did not have that sagittal suture. So just to kind of give you a sense for what the sagittal suture is, this is the image of a typical human skull, and that going down the middle is the sagittal suture. completely missing. Now, they did DNA sampling of these separate labs, one in Canada, two in the US. The geneticists were only told that the samples came from an ancient mummy, so they didn't give them any preconceived ideas. 3 of the samples all showed a genetic population group of H2A, which basically means found in Eastern Europe, and a low frequency in Western Europe. Now, how did that occur in Paracas, Peru? Then the bone powder that they used for the sampling from the most elongated skull in the tests came back as T2B, which originates in Mesopotamia, which is now what we call Syria. So now how in the world did the DNA go back to these people coming from Syria when the skulls were found in Paracas, Peru? Now, I know Nephilim is one of the topics for this evening, and I just need to point out that the area now known as Syria is supposedly where the Nephilim are said to come from.
Interesting.
So, again, coincidence, possibly, maybe even probably, but I did find that interesting. The other thing Brian said is that these people with these elongated skulls missing that sagittal suture just kind of appeared suddenly on the coast of Peru, and then about 1,000 years later just disappeared. Now he thinks they were wiped out, but how did they just appear all of a sudden and then they're gone? So I actually was very interested in the theory of, could this be aliens? I mean, I don't even know.
Alien intervention
Yeah.
with humans.
Yeah. So if you're okay, Brian, I'd like to just play a small clip of that exchange.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So do you think that these are beings that were messed with DNA wise by aliens? Yes or no?
It is possible. I'll go that far.
I like that.
I mean, again, they're such an anomaly. They suddenly appear, in a relatively short period of time, and then I think they were wiped out. And the genetic and the physical characteristics that make them different from a normal human being, makes them a very strange subject that academics honestly don't want to look at.
So, I found that interesting that he was willing to go there. Obviously, he doesn't necessarily have evidence of that. But the thing is, again, the typical scientists up there, the debunkers, they'll just say that he's nuts, that these are obviously humans. They'll try to explain away the missing sagittal sutures as, early forming of the elongated skull via binding. But how you get so many in one society, I don't think is quite that explainable. Now, if you'll bear with me, Brian, I found an article today. It's actually not that new. I think it came out in 2018, but it was about, and here's the image. It was about these Bulgarian brides that were found in Germany alongside regularly shaped skulls near 6 modern southern German towns along the Danube River starting in the late 1960s. They unearthed these skulls, and most of them were normal, like you see the one on the right, and some of them were very much elongated, as you can see there on the left. Few clues exist as to their identities or how and why the skulls were stretched. Anthropologist and population geneticist Joachim Berger from the Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, Germany, sequenced their DNA of 10 men and 13 women with normal skulls matched the modern population in Southern and Northern Europe, which means blonde hair, blue eyes, basically Germans. The 13, which were all women that had elongated skulls, had genes for dark hair and dark eyes. Now, the theory is that potentially these were brides that came from somewhere else and were given to nobility. It was artificial elongation, that the infant skulls were bound repeatedly and purposefully turned into this elongated skull. High-ranking Southeastern European women traveled to Bavaria and married for political alliances. But the thing is, the story doesn't really add up, because ancient tribes intermarried for political reasons, usually in ones and twos. It would be extremely unusual to send more than a dozen women in a single generation to one area to marry, and they have completely different DNA. Now, if you think about the Paracas skulls in Peru that have this brown, wavy hair, different DNA, and then this elongated skull in Germany, 12 women for some reason have completely different DNA than the local population. I can't help but wonder what the heck is going on there. Well, what does that even mean?
Right. And the one thing about the Paracas skulls that always fascinated me was it's not just the elongation of the skull, it's also the robust jawbone that's larger than normal. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the way that they've figured out that the backbone or the spine connected to those skulls is slightly different than regular human skulls because of the size. You can't have a skull. I think if I'm not mistaken, again, it was like 20% more in the cranial area as far as capacity for the brain size than a regular human skull. I mean, 20% when you're talking about a skull and like a cavity for a brain is a lot of space, and it was much larger than a regular human. So there's so many different things going on. And I know the skeptics and the cynics always go to, well, it's just head binding. It's something that's been done, thousands of years.
Exactly, yeah.
But when you go to those different things, like I said, the robust jawbone, the way that the spine attached to the skull, binding of the head doesn't change those things. That's anatomically impossible to change.
Doing to measure it? How are they doing that? We need proof of, that their measurements are accurate. So you can always poke holes and then walk away. And unfortunately, that's what we get. So, but the thing I wanted to cross over with on this is there's an Algerian cave with a lot of historic paintings that come from around 6000 BC. And I'm gonna murder this. I believe it's called Tassili Najer.
Good job.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Right. So here is an image that was painted in that cave. And, we got to zoom in. It's low res, but that looks pretty obviously to be what?
An elephant.
An elephant, right? That's pretty literally an elephant. Like, you couldn't really mistake that for something else. Here's another image. Again, I would say pretty literal, right? You've got a person interacting with what?
A giraffe.
It's Chad and his giraffe.
Yeah.
Correct. But that's again, pretty literal. There's giraffes in the background. There's a giraffe in the front. I think right there is maybe some kind of like a deer type animal or a yak or something.
It's an
like
elk.
That. An elk. Thank you, sir. Again, pretty literal. But then all of a sudden, in the same group of imagery in this cave comes this image. Now, look at this. This is some kind of humanoid that's very large, apparently. There's another person there. This one is very large. And what does it have? It has a very elongated skull, right? It's holding, maybe, is that a weapon, a sword? I don't know. And this person down here is either scrubbing that being's balls or I don't know what's going on there.
And that person will maybe come up to their knee.
Yeah. Now,
if they were gonna
if you
stand
notice, the
aside.
feet are actually up. So, you could say that maybe this is a perspective, that this person is in the distance, in the background. I don't know, but how do you account for that very elongated skull when we just saw that the other cave paintings in that same system were very literal?
Mm-hmm.
How do you account for this? Here's another one from that same cave. Now, I don't even know what to make of this. A Cyclops astronaut.
With a scarf on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Cyclops, when I was looking into the history of giants, Cyclops did come up.
Did come up, right?
So a one-eyed giant.
Yeah.
This is what this looks like.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we think about giants and the Paracas skulls and all of that, it kind of, I mean, I just couldn't help but think that this really old cave painting kind of brought it all together.
And where was this painting from again?
Oh my God, are you going to make me say it? An Algerian cave in the area of Tassili in Niger.
Okay, so not in Peru.
No. Nope, not in Peru. Thoughts?
It's definitely interesting, man. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I definitely believe that those kind of things could have existed. The problem I guess I have, and I don't know if it's just me coming from this current climate that we're in. I've had people tell me that they've had experiences with giants recently. And
can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I haven't heard that. Is that on your show? Because I do listen to your show. I must have missed that episode.
I have not had anybody tell me this on the air. I've had people tell me this off the air. And that's one of the things that drove me to want to do the show on giants, is because people have had these kind of things happen and they won't come on. People will come on and tell me about Bigfoot all day, but they will not tell me about this 20-foot giant that they've seen on the air, because they think people are going to think they're absolutely batshit crazy. So, and I've had it at least 3 times that I've talked to people off the air that refuse to come on the show and tell me their story. But it is a very curious thing, because they're having, and normally it happens very deep in the woods, out in very remote areas. I think all 3 that have told me these have been in the Pacific Northwest. Well, I take that back. 2 were in the Pacific Northwest. I think 1 was in New Mexico. And a couple of the beings were supposed to be upwards of 20 feet. I think the last one in New Mexico was about 13 to 14 feet. So
they look like humans.
Yeah. Very humanoid, not the typical Sasquatch sighting. We're talking about like humanoid looking, for all intensive purposes, a human that's, between 13 and 20 feet tall.
So
were
what
they
was
naked? Or
yeah.
I think
were they wearing clothes, or
every person that I've talked to said they were wearing some type of garb. I don't remember any of them saying that they were nude. I probably didn't do a very good job and ask those questions, but I don't think anybody said they were nude. I think they were all.
What was the interaction? Was it like, did that being see them as well? I mean,
yeah, terrifying. Was it good experience?
Well, I take that with a grain of salt, because the person that saw it in New Mexico, I think he might have had some issues going on, outside of what he was seeing. So I sort of take that with a grain of salt. But I think the other 2 were from a distance, and there was no real interaction. I don't think the other beings even were aware of the people that saw them, which in and of itself is a whole nother rabbit hole that, I recently went down with Lon Strickler when I had him on the show, because I asked Lon the question of, why is it that we're constantly, or at least I get this all the time, I get people who have these experiences and they see these things, and they'll even send me pictures, or in some cases video, and tell me that they see an entity in this picture and video that I don't see.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had that.
We've seen that many times.
Right. So you come down, I don't know about you, but I come down on the side of either this person is absolutely crazy, and they don't see anything and they're just making it up. Or it's a pareidolia kind of thing and they're seeing what they want to see. Or maybe they're seeing something that I'm not meant to see.
Mhm.
And when I asked that question of Lon, he's been doing this for, 30 years and he's had experiences of his own. And his answer to me was he thinks that most, if not all of these things are somehow interdimensional. They travel in between and out of and into our dimension. And some of them don't know they're being seen. Some of them are aware, they're surprised. So I come down on, at the end of the day, I don't know what to believe.
So I get that the interdimensional argument is an interesting thing, but when somebody presents to us an image
Yeah, how does that work?
and they say to us, "Look, there it is," and they're expecting us to agree, and you see nothing, I find that hard to believe. So if they saw it in person and it was interdimensional and it was, kind of here and there at the same time, fine. But you taking that picture and then deciding, I'm going to now present this to somebody as, look at that, it's real. For me, if that was me, I would say, I'm not going to show this to anybody. It doesn't show anything.
Mm-hmm. But they believe it does.
Well,
Right.
that's when I lose all credibility.
I mean, we had a gentleman, I think, for 2 hours, if you remember, show us
I
photo
do,
after
yes.
photo with videos, and we couldn't see anything.
Yeah,
But
correct. Unfortunately,
yeah.
all you experiences there, contact us at connected.
Yes, please.
Right. So that you can say we're batshit crazy because you don't see anything we see. But that happens to me all the time, like I said. And it comes down to either there's nothing in the photo or they're somehow managing this pareidolia sort of effect of what they think they see, or maybe there is something there that I can't see. And it just comes down, I believe, for most all of this, it's about what you really believe, and what people tend to believe is what they're taught, or I don't know. But for me, if I can't see it or I can't put my hands on it, then it's not there in most cases. And,
So
I
go ahead.
no, I was going to say there's people that I would love to talk to. I think, what is his name? L.A. Mazzulli, I believe, is supposed to have had some photos that was given to him or he came across from a while back that actually depicted some of these huge giants. I would love to see some of those things because I want to believe with all my heart that they exist, but I just don't see the evidence at this point,
Yeah.
At
So
one time, go ahead.
Sorry, people that say they've seen giants in modern times, I find that much more difficult to believe, almost impossible, than the thought that maybe they existed in the past and in this sort of, paleo history, if you will. Because we know that giant dinosaurs did exist. But for a species of 13-foot to 20-foot humans to be living in the woods undetected, I mean, you need people, you need other beings like you around to continue the race, as Bob would say, to fornicate.
Correct. And if they're interdimensional, though, that explains it.
So, but they're in another dimension just hanging out, and every once in a while they enter ours, and
They may not know that they're entering a dimension. Like these encounters occurred. They saw this. The giants didn't acknowledge.
so what I would like to see is I would like to talk to a human who has accidentally entered into another dimension,
But maybe,
like these things accidentally enter into ours.
No, maybe they did enter the other dimension to see the giants.
Yeah, I guess anything's possible.
I mean, that would explain it. Not that they're like bending down in the woods so their head doesn't show above the trees,
And that's why that Sasquatch is so surprised when he's caught.
So in speaking
Yeah.
of the Bible brings up giants
Yeah.
consistently, which you did not touch on.
The
Chad.
Nephilim.
The Nephilim. I mean, what's the Goliath and
Correct.
so
David and Goliath.
David and Goliath, your favorite story. So Is there anything there that, for eons it's been brought up?
Well, so there's the Book of Enoch, which talks about the Nephilim, but that's not part of the original biblical text. A lot of people cite that when they're asked, what do you think Sasquatch is? And they say, I believe it's the Nephilim from the Book of Enoch. But if you talk to religious scholars of the Christian faith, they will tell you that the Book of Enoch is not to be taken with the same weight as the Bible because it was written some 300 to 800 years later. But the Book of Genesis does mention them, sort of. It says, and I'm going to just read this, bear with me. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, in other words, hot. And they took them wives, all of which they chose. There were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, which I think means had baby, they bore children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So, AKA
Fallen angels' offspring.
Well, fallen angel is one of the interpretations, but this really just says the sons of God. And when they saw daughters of men, they were taken, right? Like, oh my God, I got to get some of that.
Mm-hmm. And they did.
And then they did. And then their offspring were mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So interpret from that what you will. Then the Book of Enoch, which came sometime later, which a lot of people cite, it had a lot more information about the Nephilim and how they were fallen angels and this and that and the other thing. But again, religious scholars will say that that doesn't carry the same weight as the original Bible text. I'm not religious, so I can't speak to any of this with any, authority, obviously. I can't speak to any of the shit we're talking about with authority, to be honest.
I mean, you saw Andre the Giant wrestle in WWF. Think if he was the smallest member of his ancestral family.
Yes.
I don't know if he was, and I know he had issues medically, but
he had gigantism. That's the problem.
So I've seen elephantitis.
No, that's different.
That's where one thing will grow real
That's
big.
when your balls are like,
No, that's
400 pounds.
That's elephantitis of the balls. But I think you can also have it of the foot, not the whole body. So
gigantism is just basically your hormones don't tell your body to stop growing like it should.
And I still go back to the fact maybe the evidence these people have found in these old articles, maybe it was gigantism, but they died
however,
young. And
just to counter that, gigantism is extremely rare. It's like 1 in X thousand people that ever gets it. And then you have these entire supposedly societies, whether it's the Paracas skulls with their huge heads or these supposed skeletons that were found where there's like hundreds of them in one place. I don't know how that occurs all at once, but it's possible.
If you had gigantism and you know of a town where everyone also had gigantism, would you go there? Maybe. You know what I mean? And maybe they didn't live long, like I said. Maybe they congregated. And maybe it wasn't rare thousands of years ago.
This sounds like a children's book you should write.
Maybe I should.
God, I love the way you think, Bob.
It's like a child. As Avi Loeb says, think like a child.
Yes, he does. Yes.
You think like a child who's all about the fornication.
That occurs. That does occur.
It does occur. Somewhere around 11, 12, 13 years old. But I mean, that's the child who's thinking about fornication.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure where you're going with that.
You better not. You son of a gun.
Did not know.
So, but the thing is, Brian, you have a lot of Sasquatch experiencers. And, how many of them tell you they believe that it's the Nephilim?
I've only had a couple, actually. I've done one entire show with a guy who had an experience with Sasquatch, and he believed that it was the Nephilim that could possibly be the answer behind the Sasquatch enigma. I'm just not there with it. I don't really think that's, again, I'm not religious. So when it comes to the Bible and those kind of things, I believe there's a little bit of truth in everything, whether it be the Bible or Native American lore or whatever the case may be. I think everything is born from some sort of truth. But to have the Nephilim or the Nephilim be the explanation and the end all be all for all the Sasquatch sightings, I'm just not there with that. I think it's more of some sort of a relic hominin, hominoid type of creature, maybe Gigantopithecus. I don't know. I just don't think that the fallen angel and the biblical explanation is probably the one that I would tend to go with. But I don't know, the more I do these shows and the more people I talk to, the more I open up my mind to the possibility. I just did a show today. It was actually a couple of things I read off of the Phantoms Monsters website from Lon Strickler. And one of the things that I talked about during that was this interdimensional thing with the Sasquatch, and some of these creatures that people see. I don't like to explain an unexplained thing with something else that's unexplainable. You're explaining one mystery with another mystery wrapped in an enigma. I don't like that kind of thought process when it comes to these kind of things. But when it comes down to Sasquatch, if you choose to believe they exist, at some point you start asking yourself the questions. And I've asked this recently over and over and over again. I've been so cantankerous with some of the people on my show. I'm so to the point of it's 2022 and we still don't have definitive proof that these things exist. Why? So when you start asking those questions, you almost start answering your own questions with other enigmas. Well, they don't exist because they're interdimensional, and that's why we haven't found a body. And I start going down these rabbit holes, and it just, I have to stop and eventually go to bed because it drives me insane. It's like you're opening up this onion that just never stops. So
the Nephilim thing, if I could just close the loop on that and why I do not believe in that. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that there were sons of God or fallen angels that came down to earth somehow, saw human women, were turned on, banged them, had children, and then their children ran into the woods of the Northeast US to hide forever for the next 2,000 years, only to be seen by accident every once in a while. And they hunt deer. That's just so far-fetched for me. It's really hard for me to believe that that's what they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I tend to agree, man. So I don't think we're going to close the chapter on this by any stretch of the imagination in this show, obviously, but Chad and Bob, I'll give you the last word. I mean, what are your thoughts on giants in general? Did they exist? Do they exist? And if so, where do you think they came from and what are they?
Bob, you go.
I think they did exist because we don't know shit about our history. If you look at, encyclopedias, it goes back so far, but I would like to believe they did exist. Are they here now? Maybe in another dimension, but until I see one, I, may not believe that they still exist.
So in what form do you believe? Like 10 feet, 13 feet?
I mean, the fable as a child where Jack climbed the beanstalk, planted the seed.
Yeah.
So, who knows? I mean, God only knows.
Yeah. Oh, man. Where do I stand on this?
So think of the dinosaurs, dude. If we didn't have the bones, we would never believe, and they existed. So who's to say there wasn't a huge human with a dinosaur pet? I don't know.
Well, yeah, but why is it true that the Smithsonian and everybody else is hiding the giant bones of giant humans today?
Yes.
Well, okay, then I believe.
No, I don't know. I don't know about that. I'm saying it is not out of the realm of possibility that they did exist at one time.
Yeah, it was definitely not out of the realm of possibility. What do I think?
Yes.
I'm going to be honest. If somebody held a gun to my head and said to me, you have to pick a side, even though I presented all this quote unquote evidence, I would have to stick with the side of the giants did not exist.
Ever.
Correct.
You idiot.
Not as we think of them. Unfortunately, because I want to believe, but
you say not as you think of them. What do you mean by that?
Like, okay, so we think that humans were generally somewhere between 5 feet and 5'7" on average, right? Before modern times. And now it's more like 5'10" to 6 something, or maybe 5'9" to 6 something. Maybe it's possible that back in the day, humans were more like 5'11" to 7 feet tall. Would we call that giants? I don't know.
I mean, weren't Mayans like 3 to 4 feet tall back in the day?
I don't think they were that short. That's like the little people.
I did, put a little extra smallness in, but my point is,
That's called the duende.
we don't know, is my point. Brian, what say you?
Well, before we move on to what I think, I want to challenge Chad on specifically the Paracas skulls, because I don't necessarily think they're connected to the giants, but I want to know your thoughts on those. What do you think they are, and where do you think they came from? Do you think they're aliens?
Oh man, I don't have the answer on that either. And I couldn't even nail Brian Forrester down on that. He did say, I can't say it's out of the realm of possibility in, the episode with us. Man.
But Brian literally, he's an American. He moved there to study them more because he was so interested.
Yeah.
Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. I mean, so I'll tell you what I don't believe. I don't believe that they're just normal humans that bound their heads, and all of a sudden in this one area, they're all missing, or not, I shouldn't say all, but most of them are missing the sagittal suture. Because I do know the sagittal suture can be missing in bound heads on occasion, but to have that occur over and over and over and over again in one people, and then have their hair for some reason be a different color and a different texture, I find that very hard to believe. Do I think that it was alien seed? I just can't answer that, man, honestly.
And how do you explain the babies with no suture in the head and with elongated skull?
I can't explain it.
Why not?
I don't know.
I mean, something's going on there, for sure. But
none of us know anything. That's what it's all about. Yeah, I think to answer your question, Bob, I think at some point I'm sort of in the boat with you, rowing in the same direction at this point. I think that giants may have existed in some capacity at some point. To say they are now, I don't think that's possible. Maybe outside of another dimension, like you said. And I don't necessarily think they're related to Bigfoot, Sasquatch. I think there's something altogether different. I think it's some sort of relic, hominin. I've always thought that. So I'm going to kind of stick to that as far as that's my final Jeopardy answer on Sasquatch and giants.
So to sum it up, your team, Bob. Thank you.
That's okay. I will be a loner.
And we like loners. It's okay.
It's always good to have you guys, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about all this crazy stuff that we've talked about tonight, guys. Everybody go over and check out the Basement Hangout. Give the guys a listen. They have a fantastic show over there. Chad and Bob, thanks so much for being on the show, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having us. We always enjoy it.
We'll see you soon, hopefully.
Of course you will, because I'll need some more content next week.
Oh my God.
So I was going to ask you off air, have you ever looked into the crystal skulls?
I have not.
So there's a dude who claims he has these crystal skulls. It was a mother and a child in a cave who I don't know how they died, but it seemed to be sudden. And the one skeleton was holding, the mother skeleton was holding the baby skeleton, and the skulls were either crystal or crystallized somehow. Super crazy.
Yeah.
But
they made an appearance in an Indiana Jones movie.
That was real.
It's literally called Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull.
There's a dude, like, he was going around, I want to say 15, 20 years ago, like, he had them and shit, taking them, getting them analyzed by scientists.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Really?
Cool. Have you done your Mel's whole episode yet?
Yes, we did it, I think, last week.
So I'd sent Chad, there's a website you probably found called melshole.org. Did you find that?
Oh, I probably looked at it. I don't remember if I did or not. But
so anyway, they have every appearance on radio of Mel Waters, the original, the guy. But just wanted to point out, if you haven't heard, I know this bitch did not listen to it, but it's okay. When we play shuffleboard, I'm going to be putting it on the Sunday speakers.
Yeah, I think Mel's Hole was 100%. I think it was 100% complete bullshit. After I did the research, yeah, I think Mel might have existed. I think that there might have been some sort of hole, but all the stuff that he talked about, as much as Greg and I did, I mean, it was almost an hour and a half we talked about this shit, and I just couldn't find anything that convinced me because there was literally nothing. Now, I did have a guy reach out to me after the show came out. He sent me a private message and told me that he had the coordinates, and he sent me the coordinates. And
wow,
I haven't looked at it, but he said he had the actual coordinates that I could put in and either go to or check it out on Google Earth. Yeah, but I haven't done it yet. So
when I had originally listened to it, it was like 3 times he came on. It was very believable. And then this website, I hadn't listened to every single appearance on Coast to Coast AM. As I started listening, he looked exactly like Willie Nelson. He was in a divorce with his wife, was being paid $250,000 a month by the government, supposedly. And then he was either drugged or kidnapped. Basically, the story got crazier and crazier. So I may, step on Team Brian with this aspect of the Mel's
You guys
Hole.
are on the same team. Continue.
Today we are,
Yeah, when it came down to he got kidnapped and his molars and his back teeth were pulled, and he was gone for 12 days, and then he discovered another hole somewhere out in Nevada, and I was like,
that was
dude, it's a great story, but I think it's completely 100% fabricated.
Yeah, but it was done so well, god damn it, in the beginning. Then he went too far.
I know. It's what always happens, man. It happens with every single person. Todd Stanley.
I do wonder how many of your Sasquatch listenership I'm going to upset with my anti-Nephilim tirade.
Well, he did say it doesn't come up often.
Yeah.
I don't think a whole lot of my listeners are on that train, because when that episode aired, I had some, 10 or 12 people reach out and say, yeah, I believe it. I think it was fuck, I don't even remember his name, that said, yeah, I'm with him, but most people don't believe that. I think a lot of people that are into the Sasquatch thing are not so religious. I think he was more of a religious kind of aspect. And I think people use that as a way to explain what they've seen. They say it's in the Bible, so yeah, it exists. But, in general, I don't think too many people believe that. Like you said, Chad, it was a perfect way to put it. The offspring of these gods, then they go hide in the the Pacific Northwest to kill deer and be seen on occasion. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
They could be dominant species if they exist.
So what do you guys want to talk about next?
Wow, that's a good question. We're going to have to.
Yeah, I gave you a good idea. Now I can't remember because it was late at night.
The crystal skulls?
No. I texted you.
I mean, you're the one who changed it up. We were going to do the hums, and you texted me and said, "Hey, let's do giants."
Oh, okay. Well, giants are good shit, and you know a lot about the hums.
I don't know a lot, but I'm very intrigued by it. I will know a lot by the next time we talk.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Well, I was sort of intrigued. I don't know shit about the hums, but Chad, you and I were texting about the hums, and I think I'm the one who threw out the giants things, but I will study up on the hums, and that may be a good thing to talk about in the future for sure.
Yeah, this is like the thing that could have happened in Cuba, where like the United States government was researching it.
Well, so that wasn't audible.
Right, that's true, yeah. And then they thought that might have been a weapon.
And there's, areas like entire towns where certain people that live in that town are driven crazy by these hums. They can't sleep. Not everybody hears it, but a large portion of people comparatively do hear it, and they can't explain it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, so I find that to be pretty damn interesting. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that
There's a
may
lot
be
of
a
weird shit out there, man.
So have you ever done anything on time travel? I know that we don't have any evidence of it, but we could take 10 minutes in an episode just to speak about it, I think.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
fascinated by it, man. I've seen some things online that sort of, there's those pictures of purported people that have traveled back in time, and they've got things
Like,
that
do-
wouldn't have existed at the time that they are photographed and things like that. There's one famous one. I think it may actually be a video clip of a silent film where this lady's walking into a silent film. Have you guys seen that where she's on a cell phone?
Yeah. Or there was a Mike Tyson fight, and a dude like in the third row is holding he's taking a picture what looks like an iPhone, but it was before the iPhone was invented.
So I have another idea: is the Mandela effect.
Mm.
Yeah, I like that one.
So the thing there is we can get into all of the different Mandela effect things that are out there, and we can say, is this just mass, misremembering
Right.
because it invades the culture and then everybody just gloms onto it, or is there something to it?
Like Berenstein Bears or Berenstein.
So what's really interesting about that
The Berenstein Bears.
is everybody's said that it's always been like the fact that it's the Berenstein Bears is what everybody remembers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the Mandela effect examples. And if you look at all the books, it's Berenstain, right? AIN.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, why does everybody remember it being Berenstein? It's this other dimensional Mandela effect BS. And it's not real. It's always been Berenstain. It's just a cognitive dissonance or whatever. On Reddit, like a week ago, this dude said, I have found in the attic of my house
No shit.
a book that has Berenstein on it, and he posted the picture.
Really?
And so that's pretty goddamn interesting.
So I always like the Planter's Peanut doesn't have a monocle.
Yeah.
Or is it the Monopoly
it's
guy?
the Monopoly guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. So anyway, so diversions in the multiverse.
Or the beginning of a Disney movie when Tinkerbell comes and dots the eye with the wand.
Yeah.
Supposedly that never existed.
Yeah, but so I remember that.
I know I saw that shit.
Well, I like time travel and I like the Mandela effect. So
Yeah.
I think that those could tie into each other pretty easily. So
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, those both
Yeah,
interesting.
I
Sure.
agree.
All right.
All right, fellas. Well, I appreciate it as always.
Thanks, man.
Is your storm over?
Yeah, it finally passed over. I'm going to go as soon as I end this, I'm going to see how everything sounds. There was a little bit of pixelation. I lost you guys a couple of times during the interview over the StreamYard. So hopefully I can save it all. But if you guys have any issues, or if I have any issues, I'll reach out to you and maybe we'll have to do some pickups. I'm pretty good at editing. So
Sure.
So
If I
hey,
lost
just on my side, everything was pretty good, except for there were a couple occasions where you came through over the decibel limit and clipped. So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the thing with StreamYard or what, because that I've never heard that happen on Zoom. But Zoom's
yeah.
quality is not as good.
Yeah, Zoom sucks.
Yeah, I agree. Everything I heard that wasn't pixelated or we didn't lose, like a couple of times I was even getting on my end, it was saying my internet was not, the quality was not great or whatever. And I've never seen that before. We've got like really fast internet here. So, but yeah, once I get into it and I start editing, if there's any issues or if you have any issues or you need me to do any pickups or anything on your end, just let me know.
Yeah, man. If you want to send me, like you did last time, your edit.
Okay.
Probably don't need your whole intro this time, even though that was nice to have the first time. This time we'll just record our own intro and then go right into where you go. I'd like to welcome Chad and Bob or whatever.
Yeah, as soon as when I get it edited, I'll send you just the raw audio of the edit itself. I
Sounds
won't
great.
do the intro or anything.
Thanks, man. We appreciate you doing all the work.
Absolutely, man. Y'all have a good one.
You too.
Yeah, you do,
Bye.
man.
All right, bye.